Okay, good morning. We finished yesterday on page and Ayin Beis, volume 2, page 1157, Aleph Kufrun Zayin, the end of the paragraph, which I just want to review, and then we were going to go to Tzadik Daled and learn this whole section from 1155 to 1157 with the Frierdiker Rebbe's additions and explanations. But let me first sum up what we learned and maybe explain it a bit more. So we've been learning the first level of bittul in Ur, first of 4 levels. And what is this bittul? It's called bittul of heder tfisas mokim. That's the words he uses. It's Ur. So the actual personality of Ur is what? Is attached to its source, and it's aware of its source. All the time. Its whole identity is awareness of its source. As a result, it's completely bottled to the point that it doesn't feel any self-value. That's heder tfisas mokim, completely nullified in the presence of its source. But he said, v'hagam, and though, those are the words he used. V'agam on page 1155. V'agam sha'bitl dedet v'smok shaykh legabi gili eir. And though this type of bitl of sensing your source and being completely nullified in his presence is shaykh, is fitting when we talk about gili eir, like the flame in the light of the sun, like a chacham cotton in presence of a greater chacham, who's aware of the presence, and without the awareness, there wouldn't be this bittul. Remember, this bittul is because you're aware and feeling it. But when it comes, he says, these are the words he uses. In Tzadik Daled, he's going to elaborate a bit more, but he's Avla Atzmus Harilamayla B'chinas Gili. Atzmus is higher than Gili. So why do we use the word Tfisas Mokim? Meaning that it senses a distance, it's completely in a different realm. And the answer is, briefly, in one line, is because Ur does sense its source. It may be infinite, not maybe, it is infinite from its source, just as much as the Yesh is. But the way Ur emerges, Ur is a revealing element, and one that is about connection, and about revelation, and about awareness. And as such, and I'm going back now to the answer we learned yesterday, that even though it's muvdal, Atzmus is muvdal and is not b'bchinas kiruv lahamtzi davar, but kol mokem etzias eim and Atzmus ulei b'chinas richuk, and that's why you could say, lechein shayach lema ba'ershal dehergish Atzmus harim is battle b'atzmusei, because Ur is all about feeling and sensing its source. So that's why you could say it's ein teifas mokem. Being that it's like he says, the liyash is over madrigas gaveis beyeser, al kein zesh ein b'chinas rich min asmin has a maspik that the hergish asmin b'chinas hedet tfisas mokem ba'atzmin legamish mizbat legami be'etzem uhuse. So in other words, what the additional point to explain this is, not because Ur gets closer to Atzmus, or Atzmus is closer to Ur, and therefore the Havamina remains. Atzmus is higher than Gili. But Ur, because Ur is about sensing its source, therefore you can say these words that the Ur feels completely selfless, completely nullified in this presence. Not because it has anything in common with it, but because it is all about feeling that source, sensing that source. That's what he says here. And the example he gave was Rotzen. The Rotzen HaMelech, or the Rotzen HaNefesh, all it is a reflection of the Nefesh. So it doesn't mean Rotzen is closer to the Nefesh than Chochmah, wisdom is. The Nefesh is equally distant, but Rotzen has nothing but expressing its, like I said, the chief of staff, he's always in the presence of the king because that's his role. Not because he's closer to the king on the level. He's as distant from the king as all levels, but that's his role. So he's always there, And because of that, he's completely nullified in their presence. Now, the key thing to remember here, and this is what I want to explain right now. Just 1 second. Okay. That when he explained the difference between Ratzon and Seichel, he said the following. I mean, to understand that a bit better, you have to realize this, as I mentioned. Seichel, or for that matter, any koyach prati, any particular faculty, also comes from the nefesh. It doesn't have its own identity. However, it's the way the nefesh is manifesting in a particular form. You may remember a while back we learned the concept of murkav. Something is murkav. When you say, for example, that a body like a sun gives off light, light is a general reflection of everything the sun contains. We know, however, that sunlight also has X-ray, has infrared, and has other so-called chemicals and energy and forces that also come from the sun. But it's light that is the most reflective of the general sun, meaning light carries everything. So even though everything comes from Atzmos, creates everything, but when you say, for example, Chochmah or Bina, Seichel, you're saying it's already taking on an additional element. Like it's like somewhat like we learned about the color white versus other colors. So the color white, not dyed white. The natural color white is the natural color of light. And yet we know that light, when you put it in a prism and you bend light, you see other colors, red, blue, green, etc. And still white is its most natural element. So basically saying, Oyer, like Ratzon, their role is just reflecting whatever Atzmos is going to reflect. Once you speak about faculties, you're talking about something specific. Something specific, so therefore it adds like an ingredient to it. We'd be like, let's say you're cooking, baking something. So you're using plain water or plain flour, you're going to bake something. But then you stick in other ingredients. So if someone said to you, what are the basic elements? You'll say the basic element is I took flour, water, and flour, and I'm making a challah from it. Then I added olives, I added spices, I added this or I added that. So in other words, there's the base, and then there's what you add on. So when you say, Atzmos created existence is in a way that first he wanted something that is poshet, that doesn't have a shape and form. Oyer is the best example for expressing without any, no diluted, no hybrids, no mixes. Later, Oyer will interact with another koyach of Atzmos, which is the ability to create specifics. And that's when you begin to get a shape of Chachma or Bina and so on. So if you talk about Oyer itself, therefore, even though Oyer is also equally distant from Atzmos as anything is, but its personality is one that is all about the revealing of Elokus. And as such, it has that awareness that he's saying here. That's one point I wanted to make. Another point is in Samach Vav, in Vayelach, he says that the Mukabolim Harishenim, the Mukabolim, especially the Rameh and the Ramak, they talk a lot about Ratzon, God's desire. And he says that desire at the end of the day cannot be the highest level because it's already some form and shape when you desire something. That's what he says, Chidush Admunish Meseiden, Rabbeinu Nish Meseiden, the Alter Rebbe, the inyan of Oyer. So there he makes a distinction between Oyer and Ratzon. That Oyer is a field of energy much more shapeless than Ratzon is. Even the highest level of Ratzon and desire. Here, he's clearly he's associating them. he actually uses Ratzon as an example to explain Ur. So I was just thinking, what I wanted to share was that it could be that in Ayin Beis, he's coming to explain how from Ur, remember we learned from Ur becoming Ratzon goes through stages, especially in Tzadik Dalet. That first there's Ur, completely shapeless. There's no Ratzon even. Then comes the Heskim where he begins to consider existence. And then comes the deliberation, and then the determination. But now he's equating Ratzon and Ur, and perhaps because once Ratzon emerges, it carries the Ur through the Ratzon, which will then become from the Ratzon into the Keiches, which is Chachma, Seichel, Amidus, and so on. So I just wanted to make that point as well. Point being, at the end of the day, is that Ur is the highest possible level. It's an Ur that reflects its source. But I want to go back to this point here. That you don't need to necessarily, even though Ur itself does not appreciate or even know what Atzmus is like, because like we said, Atzmus and Ur are nothing in common. Ur is a Metzias Nimtza, Ur is a Ha'ara, Atzmus is a Etzem. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that Ur cannot be bottled to it. You don't have to know the thing that you're standing in the presence of to be completely nullified by it. That, I think, is a key element, even though he doesn't say it explicitly, but it sounds very much that's what he wants to say here. Okay. I think that's some of the things I wanted to add into this picture. If anybody has any questions, please. If not, we're going to go to Tzadik Dalet and learn these pages, these ideas there. So we're going to go over this again. It's not the end of it. I also believe after we understand, one second. I also believe that after we learn the other three levels of Bittul, we'll probably be able to understand this level better as well. And I think some things will be more clarified then. But we did finish the first level of Bittul. And as I said, I'm ready to go to Tzadik Dalet, but let's hear if anybody has any questions. Go ahead.
If the oil is equal to everyone in the distance from the Etzem, from Atzmos, and the oil does not have to know the Atzmos and still having the Bittul, how are other things different from oil?
Because they don't have Bittul. Yesh doesn't have Bittul.
No.
Yesh doesn't feel its source at all. A Yesh is created in a way that Ein Le Ilah V'Siba. Oir, its whole being is sensing its source. It's like I said, the chief of staff is always in the presence of the source. The heads of the other departments are busy with their particular activities. So it's nothing to do with whether it's closer. Yesh and other levels are simply not reflecting the source altogether. There's no awareness. The Yesh was never created to have any gili and hergish of Amokar. That's why it's called Yesh. That's the main difference. So the Ur's role is a role of Gilui and connection. Doesn't mean it has to be closer. It's just its role is one that the way it manifests is one of Gili, of whatever is being, whatever its source is. It's all about the source with Ur. With Yesh and other levels, it's not about the source. It's about their particular function. Seichel, as opposed to Ratzon. Ratzon, all it is Ratzon Nefesh. It's pastas, whatever the Nefesh wants. Seichel, on the other hand, is the specific product of the Nefesh, specific faculty.
The mile of oil is that as a reflection of the moil, but here in Atzmos, it's not really a reflection, but...
I didn't say it's a reflection of Atzmos. I said that its inyan is Gilui. It's all about is a source. From Ur's point of view, it's all about the source. It makes no difference whether it captures the whole source or not, but it has nothing but the source. In Yesh, like it is with Seichel, like it is with any particular thing, there is more than just the source. It's also their identity. Ur has no identity to talk about. So all it is about the source. So there, he says, therefore, Al Capone says in the highest levels, you could say, has an element of being, it's like if you happen to be in the presence of the king all the time, it makes no difference what level you're on. You're nullified because you're in presence of a king. You're not talking about from the point of view of Atzmus. You're talking about the point of view of Oyer. Even when Oyer feels that it's Ein Areich to Atzmus, it's also a bottle because of that. In other words, it has nothing to do with Erech, with relationship. Even if Oyer senses, let's say for all practical purposes, you could say Oyer itself knows that Atzmus is completely beyond it, but it knows it. And that knowledge and that awareness makes it nullified. The Yesh doesn't know anything. The Yesh is not aware of anything. The Yesh is created, self-contained, that doesn't feel a source altogether, unless there's a Veda and it thinks about it. It is always like a fish in water, if you want, but it's not even a fish. Mitziyuse is bittul. That's the bottom line with Eir. If you may recall, when we spoke about in Sadik Dalit, he said that in Ruchnius, he says Mitziyuse is not mitzad atzmei, but kiyume is mitzad atzmei. Remember that whole discussion? So I explained then. He said then, because why is kiyume of Ruchni mitzad atzmei? Well, how could you say that? Because the etzem inyan of Ruchni is bittul, and bittul, because it's bottled to the mocker, that is a inherent quality that you can never take away from it. The more you have, because bittul kenish bottle of that, so to speak. So in other words, on even a higher level, Oyer, because of its bittul, doesn't matter whether Atzmus is infinite from it, but Oyer is in a state of bittul. A state of bittul, therefore senses and therefore feels nullified in the presence of the Atzmus. That's the bottom line. If Oyer was a Helam, it wouldn't be that way. If Oyer was a type of concealment, it would not feel that. Bottom line is, whatever Oyer is, it feels its source, even if the source is completely infinite from it, and therefore is nullified in its presence. Okay.
It might feel more than it reflects, in other words.
I didn't hear what you said.
It might feel more than it reflects, actually.
Well, being that it's bittul, we are going to learn, and we have learned that it can carry things it itself doesn't have, precisely because it's bittul. You know, when somebody's, let's say, a full entity and identity, it's going to be very difficult to give them a mission that they won't in some way dilute. Or because it is selfless, it actually becomes the carrier of everything Atzmus wants to carry, even things that Oyer itself doesn't have. Yes, we're going to learn. We've learned that. It carries the koyach of Yesh Ma'ayin, that through Mitziyusim Atzmusei uses Oyer to create. So Oyer is the creator, but not because Oyer has the power, but because Oyer is selfless. Yeah. Yeah.
In our examples of Ratzon and Seichel, it's really like Seichel. It really is separate.
Which one's like Seichel?
Our bittul. It's really like Seichel because it's separate.
No. Ratzon is like Oyer, not Seichel.
Let me finish. But it has a quality of Ratzon. It has a quality of Ratzon that it reflects.
What has a quality like Ratzon?
Or reflects. But it's really
the example here was Ratzon and Seichel was compared to Oyer. Yes, Ratzon is like Oyer. Yes.
Yeah, but it's really like a Seichel because it's something. It really is something separate. It's just in that quality.
It's exact opposite what you're saying. In Ayin Beis here, he says Oyer is like Ratzon, not like Seichel.
But we also say that it's B'li Erech just like anything else. It's just as B'li Erech as it is like the Yesh. The Yesh is B'li Erech, the Or is B'li Erech. But he makes it, he gives it a quality that it reflects. That's Mamish Korov. That's like a...
I know you're confusing me. I'm not sure what you're saying. You're trying to say something different than it says in Ayin Beis, or you're just repeating it?
I want to understand why he teaches us by Seichel also. Not just
Seichel is the opposite of Ratzon. He's coming to explain that Oyer is like Ratzon, not like Seichel. That's what he says. You have a question, you can ask a question, but I'm not sure what your
question. My question was that the process that brings art into being is similar to the process of bringing seichel into being.
Absolutely not. It's bringing the process of bringing Ratzon into being. Seichel is a particular koyach faculty that's chutz la'atzmus hanefesh and nivdal. Is not nivdal and not chutz la'atzmus hanefesh. It's how you bring Ratzon into being, not how you bring seichel. Seichel is a particular koyach. Seichel actually is more compared to yesh, not mamish, but more to yesh than it is to That's what he's saying in this mimer.
That I understand. I just wonder why he wanted to use.
Because exact opposite. Seichel is the opposite of Seichel is a koyach nivdal. It's separate. Is not nivdal. It's dovuk to the macher. And number two, Seichel is specific. He spoke of koyach hama. It's limited. Is only Eir's whole Indian is only reflecting Atzmus. Seichel is like the head of a department. It's not like the chief of staff. It's not like Ratzon.
It's also a manufactured object, so to speak. It's a manufactured object.
Absolutely not. That's not what he's trying to say here.
Okay. It is a manufactured object. It's made in a specific way that it should reflect.
Anyway, go back to the mimer and learn it inside. I don't know. I'm not sure what you're trying to say here exactly.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to go now to Tzadik Daled, page 115, chapter 25. Can everyone put on silence so we don't have the outside noise here? Okay. Just one moment. I want to just see one thing. Okay. So we're going to learn on page 115, and this is going back to page 1155 in Ayin Beis. We're going over this subject matter. And I want to just say one more thing. I want to just begin with one more point, which I think is the vital. In order for this not to be understood mechanically, like I point out, this is not mechanics. This is not an auto repair manual, and we're not talking about technicalities. Oyer, the word oyer is actually the word itself does not mean what you think it means. It's not the word light. Light is not even a good word for it. It's just a technical translation. Oyer is the concept where Atzmus is using a logical system that he created to reveal, because if there's no Oyer, there's no existence. So Oyer is really the concept of revealing something. Whatever it is that you reveal, that's what Oyer is. It's the musig of Gili. So if you had no you'd have Atzmus, and that would be it. Of course, Atzmus can create anything he wants, with or without but then it would not have any way we can understand and explain it in the seichel that we have right now. So is a fundamental to everything because it's basically the gili of Atzmos. That's what is.
That's why light is called oil.
What's that? Let me finish. Let me finish. What I'm middle of a sentence. The next thing, when you're talking about what is going to create, what Atzmos is going to create through through this gilui, that's already the details. Whether it's going to be ultimately emerging a rotzen, which is also like an as we're learning here. But lower levels, you know about chochma, bina, das, the esesphiris, as they're envisioned lifnei at tzimtzum, the esesphiris hagnuzis, the hidden ones. And then after the tzimtzum, the kav, the tzimtzum, the kav. These are all kinds of forces, all coming from Atzmos. Atzmos has the koyach to do all these things. But now when you have a mixture of gili, and then a mixture of specific details, and then a mixture of helam, concealment, and then mixing gili and helam together, which is the tzimtzum and the and the tzimtzum that creates a kav, and then the kav continues to produce existence. Now you have a full-bodied mechanism, a full-bodied tools and instruments of how existence comes into being. So will always represent gilui, no matter what. And gilui, by definition, means that it's completely committed and dedicated only to the source. That's all it has, its role is. And then whatever the source tells it to carry, that's what it will carry. But the ultimate goal, obviously, is Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Dira B'Tachtenim, not Dira B'Oyer. It doesn't say he wants a Dira in Eir Ein Sof, which would not make even sense, because Eir Ein Sof is bottled in the first place. You don't have to make a Dira out of Eir Ein Sof. It's only a Yesh that doesn't feel its source. It's only Tachtenim, with the lowest level in the Shtalshlus, that everything is concealed, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36 in Tanya. That's where you need all these levels. And Oyer plays the prominent role because any gilui that's going to happen in this world is coming from Oyer. Every gilui. Oyer will ultimately manifest in Atzilus. Atzilus will be the source of how we know God and how we feel God and experience God. So this is regardless whether Atzmus is completely distant, infinitely distant from Oyer as he is from Yesh. It makes no difference regarding this discussion. Because no matter what, Oyer is still gili. No matter what, Oyer will always remain. Its identity is an identity of bittul. And that's what it represents. So when we want to learn what bittul is, and we're going to be learning 4 levels of bittul, the first level is this bittul that Oyer carries. We want to channel the bittul of Oyer into our existence. That's ultimately the kavanah, which we'll learn later. Okay, so now we're on page 115 in Tzadik Daled. So we're going to go back a bit and then come back to where we are now. So we're going to be learning here from 115 through 121, 6 pages. Is all explaining this 3 pages in Ayin Beis. Page 137 continues already the second Eifen of Bittul. So we're going to be learning 2 points here. One is the deeper understanding that Kel Deus Havaya is 2 Deus in Eir itself, in Elokus itself. In other words, it's not just initially Das Elyon would be the Das of the Yesh Amiti, and Das Tachten is the Das of the Yesh Anivra. So he's going to say, Omnom Masha Kosev Ki Kel Deus Havaya. I said this corresponds with page 1155 in Ayin Beis. So we learned this in Ayin Beis, and the first 2 lines is word for word from Ayin Beis. Then comes the Frierdiker Rebbe's explanation. It says Kel Deus Havaya, that Havaya, Kel Deus Havaya. Moving that Beis Deus. From this we understand that the 2 Deus, the 2 perspectives, perceptions, Das Elyon, the Das Tachten, the higher perspective and the lower perspective, which we learned earlier, if you remember. From the higher perspective, the Yesh Amiti is the true Yesh, and everything below is Ayin, with the interpretation that Ayin means complete nullification. The Das Tachten is the Yesh HaNivra, looking upward, So the yesh is the created yesh, and ayin is called ayin not because it's completely nullified, but because for two reasons. It's not a dovet, it's not substance like the yeshes, and two, it's not musig, it's not comprehensible. So that's the interpretation till now. Now he's saying these 2 days themselves, they're in godliness itself. It's not just the creation and the creator, but they're both in Elikuz Gufa. And here the Frierdiker Rebbe comes to explain this.
Reflection? Is it oil to say? Is it wrong to say that?
Is it what?
Is reflection. You explain oil is gilui, but to say it's a reflection, it's wrong?
No, it's right too. It's a ha'ara of its etzem. It's a reflection, of course. It's not a reflection of everything of Atzmus, but it's a reflection of its source. It's not something else. Just because, look, when it comes to sunlight, the sun and sunlight are close to each other, but sunlight is a reflection of sun. Eir Ein Sof is a reflection of Atzmus. So yes, Atzmus has a lot more that Eir does not perceive, but it's still a reflection. What else is Eir if not a reflection of its source? And I discussed this at length in many classes before. So, I would suggest you go back there if you really want a full understanding. Both aspects of Eir. One side that Eir reflects its source, another side that that Atzmus is far beyond Eir. You can't call Atzmus a Moir. But that doesn't mean Eir is not a reflection of Atzmus.
But the description of oil is gilui.
Yes. But reflection and gilui are not that far apart.
Okay.
So now he explains, Kel de'es havaya. The havaya ub'chinas Eir. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe explaining now. The next 15, 20, more than 20 lines is all from the Frierdiker Rebbe. He says, havaya is the level of Eir. U'kiyadua being havaya v'elikim, like it's known when they talk about havaya and elikim. The two names. Shem Eir v'keli. Havaya is Eir and elikim is keli. So both names of the divine, but one expresses the Havaya, the Eir of Elikus, and one is the Keli. The Shem Havaya who Eir, the Shem Elikim Keli. Shem Havaya is Eir, and Shem Elikim is Keli. Remember, Eir and Keli are both Elikus. They're just a question of which role they play. So Havaya is the role of the energy, of the divine energy, so to speak. And Elikim is the role of the divine container, the expression of it. Now this is the entire inyan of Avedus Hashem, of Aveda. The Aveda that we do. What's the Aveda? B'yichud ha'beis Shem is the Havaya v'Elikim. Al yedei limud ha'teira v'kiyum ha'mitzvos. We say every day, we say L'Shem yichud kutchebricha v'shchinta. Or we said Yom Kippur, and we say it very often, Havaya hu Elikim. Because our role is to miyachid these two names. Remember, Atzmus is beyond any name. But the way Elikus is manifest in Ishtalshalus, or even higher than Ishtalshalus, is through the two names, through 7 names, but specifically Havaya and Elikim. Shem Shemogin, Hashem Elikim. So we speak about Shemesh as be the Eir, Mogin is like the sheath, the Keli, and together they work. That's why Elikim is Gematria HaTeva, nature. So basically you could say Havaya is Elikus, that's higher than structure of existence, and Elikim is how Elikus is manifest within existence. And the whole Aveda is to unite these two. Pantheism of Spinoza was basically God is nature and nature is God, only Elikim. There are other philosophies that only talk about Havaya, that God is beyond existence. But we are miyachid the two, that the Havaya that's higher than existence is one with existence. God is nature, but nature is not God. So basically, Havaya Elikim, and how do we do it? Through limudat Torah v'kiyum mitzvahs. When we learn Torah and do mitzvahs, we're connecting miyachid havaya and elikim. Through this becomes the yichud of eris and kelim. The Esa sphere is the Atzilus, in the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Let me just explain this for a moment, in context of everything we've been learning. Obviously, as I said, the idea that the Eibishter is one is a given, but he created existence. And once he created existence, you have a duality going on. You say, Bereshis bara lekimis hashemayim v'saretz, midas hadin, midas harachamim. So from the perspective below, we see many different levels. That's why we have to be miyachid Hashem and say, no, all these levels are all part of Elikus. That's called being liyachid Hashem, yichud Hashem. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That even though there's a ches and a dalid, which is the 7 heavens and earth, and dalid are the dalid ruchas, the 4 different directions, it all is united with Aleph. That's what we do. That's the biggest mitzvah of yichud Hashem. Essentially recognizing the oneness of God within all the multitudes of the diverse universe. But the same is also in Elikus itself. How could there be a diverse universe? Because Havaya works through Elikim. Elikim are the Eiris, Havaya is the Eir, and Elikim is the Kelim. Now, in Atzilus, the Eiris and Kelim are completely fused as one. They know exactly their function. But in Elam Haza, it's not that way. When you see Kelim in this world, when I see Kelim, I mean the material existence. So we could hypothetically not recognize the divine hand. That's why within existence, that's why we say in Rosh Hashanah, V'yoda kol pol k'ata palta, that every keli should recognize the Eir within the keli. Every glove should recognize the hand inside the glove. That's our Avodah, because on its own, it's not obvious. That's why we have Kol Masechel L'Shem Shamayim, V'chol Drachecha De'ehu. And of course, like he says here, to limud Torah and kima mitzvahs. So when you do a mitzvah, or you learn Torah, you're aligning the kelim of this world, meaning the external expression of this world with the divine energy and purpose. In different words, in the words of the Mishnah, Kol ma shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu be'elam lo bara el l'chvede. And then he goes on to say, right? What does he say? Kol hanikra b'shmi u'l'chvedi b'rosav yitzarta v'afasisiv. So in Atzilus, that's all obvious. All of Atzilus, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Ched, Yesed, Malchus, Chesed, Chochma, Bina, Das. Everything is aligned. These are divine. This is the divine attributes. But Chochma in this world, you could have Chochma and use it for something even, God forbid, destructive. You could definitely use it for something selfish. Same thing with Bina, same thing with Das, same thing with Chesed. We're always using our faculties, but they could be controlled by the Nefesh Habamis, by the animal soul. Comes when you learn Torah and you do mitzvahs, you're aligning your faculties, you're aligning the kelim of this world toward l'chvedi. It should be used for the honor and glory of God. A table should be a table where you learn Torah. A shulchan, where you eat a meal and you speak divrei Torah. What does the Mishnah say? When you don't speak divrei Torah, it calls it very negative term. Calls it a altar of death. So basically, our job is to align the kelim of existence, the structure of existence, with the purpose for which the structure was created. The purpose is conveyed through the Eir, through Havaya, and the existence is created through Elikim. So that's what he's saying here. What?
That is Dira B'Tachtenim.
Yeah. So that's what our Avodah is, to unite these two. Now he's going back to the pasuk Kel Deis Havaya. Ukashe'emer ki Kel Deis Havaya, move on. Now that you just said Havaya is Oir, so when you say Kel Deus Havaya, that God has Deus Havaya, two Deus, two perspectives in Havaya, moving that base Deus, das Tachnehem Ba'er Gufa. So we understand from this, since you're saying Havaya has two Deus, you're not saying one day is God's perspective and the other day is the human perspective. It's in Havaya. Havaya is Eir. So that means that the two perspectives, in Eir itself, there's both perspectives, the perspective from above and the perspective from below. V'hainu, shekol zeshen is bar le'il. This means that all this that was explained earlier above, hini habeis deis hem ba'ayin shenechlak l'shnayim. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't sing it correctly. That these are the two perspectives. The ayin, this one ayin, this field of energy, that divides and separates into two. That the ayin of the yesh amiti, which is the mashpia, the one that transmits, the ayin of the yesh amiti, hu b'chinas das elyon, that's the level of das elyon, the perspective of above. Shu bat miyesh la'ayin. That perspective is that you see that comes from yesh amiti to ayin. The kula kamei kalochashiv, because everything before God is completely nullified. So therefore, the true reality is the mashpia. Everything below that is ayin. Shegam etzem ha'er v'gam ha'er sheb'chinas gili min ha'etzem einem tefsim mokum klal legaba atzmus yisbarach. Like we learned earlier, that also even the etzem ha'er, and also the air that is revealed, gili min ha'etzem, that's being revealed from the core, that einem tefsim mokum klal. They completely are not tefis mokum. I mean, we're going to learn soon more about this in the detail. They completely are nullified and don't have any inherent value standing. Legabe ha'atzmus yisbarach. So that's the first ayin. The ayin of the yesh amiti, that the yesh, it's yesh la'ayin because everything is in a state of ayin. So he's saying this ayin is in the earth itself. And then comes the second ayin. Va'ayin the yesh hamisava va'anivra. Then there's the second level of ayin, that is the ayin of the created and the yesh that came into being. The yesh that came into being and the created yesh. Shehu hamakabel, that's the recipient. Hu b'bchinas das tachsun shehu ma'ayin liyesh. That's the perspective from below. That's ma'ayin liyesh. That from the ayin becomes a yesh. The first perspective is from a yesh becomes a ayin. From a state of real existence comes something that's completely bottled. From the lower perspective, it's from the ayin becomes a yesh, makabel. Shahanivra, I'm sorry, okay. Shahanivra margish atzmei lemitzias, because the nivra feels itself as an existence. Imkain, so what do we know from this? Beza deza das elyon das tachlehem dasa mashpia v'dasa makabel. So based on this, these are the two perspectives, the dasa mashpia, the perspective of the transmitter, and the perspective of the recipient. This is all a summary of what we learned earlier. According to this, even though the name Ayin is a general name that is equal by both these levels, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra, nevertheless, this is all a summary of what we learned earlier. Why he's going over it again, I'm not sure, because he already summed it up a few times, but he is. Nevertheless, the meaning is, the Pirush is not the same. The meaning of ayin is not the same as it is from the point of view of the transmitter and the point of view of the recipient. The B'das Elyon HaPirush, from the perspective above, the meaning of it is HaPirush ayin hu efes v'ayin. Ayin means efes v'ayin, nothing, zilch, nothing and nothingness. Ubedas tachten, and from the perspective below, hapirish ayin hu loy dover ve'enim musig. The meaning of ayin is that it's not substance. It's not like the substance of the yesh, and ve'enim musig, the second, that it's not comprehensible. It's mysterious. So that's what we learned earlier. This is all a long niggin. So when you go back, and he says, it's in the Er Gufi, he says, everything we learned earlier was mashpia mekabel. But now he says, but because it says, omnam, however, but from the fact that the pasuk says that the deis are in Havaya itself, meaning in the Er itself. Move on, it's understood. Sheba ayin atzmei, in the ayin itself. Hainu ba'er gufa, in the er itself. Yesh beis deis elu, the das elyon, v'das tachten. We have these two perspectives of the higher perspective and the lower perspective. So that is essentially the chiddush here. That he's not just saying it's a mashpia mekabel. Basically, it's not just the day of the oyer and the day of the keli. In Havaya itself, you have both perspectives. And I explained the das elyon ba'er k'moshe nimshach min ha'atzmos. The higher perspective is the oyer as it comes from atzmos. Shehu b'bchinas ayin be'etzem mohusei mitzad atzmei. It's in a state of ayin be'etzemos. It's fundamentally nullified. Its whole mitzias is bittul. Hainu demashu ayin hari einze masha atzmos roya oisila ayin. When we say ayin, it's not just that atzmos sees it like nothing. Kim she'er gufu b'chinas ayin ba'atzmei. The er itself is in a state of ayin itself. Now you may remember I explained what this means. That means the chiddush here is this: if only atzmus saw the er as ayin, but the er itself didn't see itself that way, then we don't have in existence in mitzias nimtza an example of utter bittul, because only atzmus sees it that way. But since the er itself sees it that way, now we have an example of total bittul, like he says mitzad atzmei. So er itself is ayin, fundamentally ayin. So this explains what we've been discussing. That er is an example of, I said gilui, but you could also say er defines bittul. It's utter bittul. Er does not have any inherent sense of value. All it is expression and reflection of its source. This is due to the er, due to its nature of being attached. Its dveikus, its entire nature, is to be attached and cleave to its source. Being that er is attached to atzmus, that's why it's fundamentally ayin. It's fundamentally ayin because it's attached to atzmus. Okay. Now, the only thing we added really here was the long piece where we reviewed Kel Deis Havaya, added about Havaya as being Oyer. That was not stated in Ayin Beis. But more or less the theme, of course, this is all straight what we learned just a few classes back.
What does it mean the oil is attached to Atzmos? Nobody by oil and moil, it's attached. You no moil, no oil. But Atzmos is not a mokel.
Doesn't matter, but oil is oil. What you keep asking me about Atzmos, but oil, you told me, think about oil, not about Atzmos. Oil, the mitzias of oil is dovuk. The mitzias of yesh is not dovuk. That's why God created oil. He created an existence called oil. Its whole role should be complete bittul and gilui. That's its purpose. The reason there's oil like the sunlight and every other form of oil is because God created the concept of oil. Oil is a concept of a mitzias that exists, but the mitzias is completely attached to its source. It's nothing to do with atzmus. It's to do with oil. That's how atzmus created oil. It should be davuk, and that's the nature of oil.
Could you explain?
Remember, there's no before atzmus made oil. There's no existence altogether. God went ahead and created the concept of Oir. Now, in existence as we know it, if there was no such thing as a sun, if there was no such thing as a moon, if there was no such thing as light, we wouldn't have the concept, we wouldn't have a muscle for Oir. God created all these existence of Oir. Everything in existence, a table is not dovuk to its source. You cut off wood from a tree, the wood is not attached to its source. Even water from an ocean is not attached to its source. A flame from another flame. Everything in existence is not attached to its source. It's a separate entity. A child is 9 months in its mother's womb, and then you cut the umbilical cord, and it's not dovuk anymore. It's not attached. However, God created another type of entity because he wanted to show us what his kashrus is, what dveikus is, what bittul is, what gilui is. So he created a concept called Oir. Oir is dovuk to its source. It has nothing but its source. Oir does not have any other agenda. It cannot go off independently and do whatever it wants. All it is dovuk to its source. It makes no difference whether the Oir is ein arech to the source or not. The bottom line is it's connected to its source. Whatever the source is, when an eved is completely connected to his odin, you mean that they have a relationship with each other? No. The master can be infinitely distant from the eved. Avram and Eliezer were not exactly in the same league. And yet the eved, because he's bottled to his master, whether he understands him, whether he understands all his depth, whether even is in the same, they're not made of the same DNA. That's even in a human level. How much more so with Atzmus? So Atzmus created a thing called Gilui and Dveikus. This is called Oir. This is embodied, personified by the concept of Oir.
So that what makes us attached that you recognize it? You said it, okay.
Because all it is, when you look at Oir, it tells you there's a Moir. That's all that you need to know. When you look at a Yesh, it tells you I exist. Ani v'afsi eid. You look at Oir, Oir tells you there's a Mokir. Human beings like Moshe Rabbeinu, Tzadikim Gemurim, the Markova, Oves Hena and Markova, when you looked at them, you saw Lakus. It wasn't about them. So Oir is basically teaching us about Lakus. It doesn't say that Avram Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu are Atzmos, or the only one Atzmos, but they are nothing but revealing what God wants. That's basically it. Without Oir, we wouldn't have bittul in existence. We wouldn't have dveikus. We wouldn't have the concept of being completely committed to something. If you took Oir out of the picture, all of existence would be fragmented pieces that have no connection to their source on a revealed level. Oir gives us the taste and experience of dveikus, what it means to be connected to something. Now, it's true, we learned clearly that Oir does not reveal the ein arech of Atzmus. Oir Yesh reveals Mitzusim Atzmuse. From Oir, we would not know whether Atzmus is built to Mitzias Nimtza or Mitzusim Atzmuse. Why? Because you could have an Oir like sunlight that reveals there's a sun. So Oir does not reveal the depth of Atzmus or the personality of Atzmus, but it reveals the existence of Atzmus. That for sure it does. That God exists. Like we learned before about a Mokir. Seichel feels there's a koyach hamaskil, and then deeper, but it does not feel the koyach heyuli. That's in seichel. The rotzen not only does it feel, but the rotzen is nothing but a reflection of its source. So Oir is not atzmus, absolutely not, but it's nothing but atzmus, nothing but a reflection of what atzmus is. Okay, where are we here? Okay, we should stop here. What's that? Basically, okay, so Al-Kenu B'chinas Ayin Be'etzem. I'm stopping by the line V'hine, by the line that starts Ayin Be'etzem, V'hine Ma. Because now he's going to go about explaining the different types of bittul that we're discussing. So the next section is going to start explaining the different forms of bittul. Just for the record, the Tzadik Daled will end after 3 levels of bittul. Ayin Beis continues with the 4th level. So this, but Tzadik Daled elaborates a lot on each one. So we're here closer to the end of page 115.